The puppy didn't bark, it didn't whine, it simply sat in the middle of the rain-soaked sidewalk, shaking, its small body hunched forward as if carrying a weight far too heavy for something so young. Officer Daniel Hayes almost drove past it. His night shift had already stretched into its 10th hour, and the city streets were quiet in that exhausted, lonely way that comes just before dawn. But just as his headlights swept over the curb, the puppy lifted its head and locked eyes with him. And then, impossibly, it stood on its back legs and pressed its muddy paws together, as if begging. Daniel slammed on the brakes, his heart thudding for reasons he couldn't explain. Daniel had been a cop for 12 years, long enough to learn that most calls ended in paperwork and disappointment. He'd seen cruelty, neglect, and loss, and somewhere along the way he'd learned to build walls around his feelings. Still, something about that puppy, its soaked fur clinging to its ribs, its eyes too serious for its tiny face, cut straight through him. He stepped out into the cold rain, crouched down, and spoke softly. The puppy didn't run, it didn't flinch. Instead, it turned and took a few unsteady steps down a narrow alley, then looked back at him, whining urgently. Daniel hesitated for only a second before following. The alley smelled of damp concrete and rust. Trash bins lined the walls, and the rainwater pooled around Daniel's boots. The puppy kept stopping, glancing back to make sure he was still there, its tail barely moving. Daniel felt a strange tension building in his chest, the kind that told him this wasn't just a lost dog. Halfway down the alley, the puppy stopped completely and began scratching at a pile of soggy cardboard near a broken fence. Its cries grew sharper now, desperate. Daniel pushed the cardboard aside, and froze. Lying beneath it was another dog, larger, older, barely breathing. One of its hind legs was twisted at an unnatural angle, and dark blood soaked into the cardboard and concrete beneath it. Daniel dropped to his knees without thinking, calling for backup and animal control as he pressed his jacket against the wound. The injured dog let out a weak whimper, and the puppy immediately pressed its body against Daniel's arm, trembling but refusing to move away. It had led him here. It had known exactly what to do. The ambulance for animals arrived quickly, but those minutes felt endless. Daniel spoke softly the entire time, to both dogs, though he wasn't sure they could understand him. The puppy never stopped staring at him, as if memorizing his face, as if afraid he might disappear. When the injured dog was finally lifted onto a stretcher, the puppy tried to climb on too, whining loudly until one of the responders gently scooped it up. Daniel watched as they were driven away, rain still falling, the alley suddenly empty and quiet. He thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. Over the next few days, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the puppy. He called the animal shelter twice, pretending it was just routine follow-up, but really he needed to know. He learned the older dog had survived surgery but would need weeks of recovery. The puppy, a female no more than 4 months old, had refused to eat for a full day until she was placed in a kennel where she could see the older dog. The shelter staff had started calling her Hope, because no matter how exhausted or scared she was, she wouldn't stop trying to stand, to watch, to wait. Daniel visited the shelter on his day off. He told himself it was just to check in, just to make sure everything was okay. But the moment he stepped inside, Hope recognized him. She barked, once, and pressed her nose against the bars, her tail wagging so hard her whole body wobbled. Daniel felt something inside him break open. He knelt down, resting his forehead against the cool metal, and for the first time in years, his eyes burned with unshed tears. As he spent more time at the shelter, Daniel learned the rest of the story. The 2 dogs had been living behind an abandoned warehouse. The older one, likely Hope's mother, had been hit by a car days earlier but had somehow crawled back to where they sheltered. Hope had stayed with her the entire time, leaving only briefly to search for food, or help. That rainy night, she had chosen Daniel. Weeks passed. Daniel visited every chance he got. He walked Hope, fed her, and sat beside the older dog, whose strength slowly returned. He told them about his job, about the long hours, about the house that felt too quiet since his wife had passed away 3 years earlier. He hadn't planned to say those things out loud, but somehow, in the presence of those animals, the words came easily. They listened without judgment, without impatience. When the older dog was finally adopted by a family with a large yard and time for rehabilitation, Daniel stood silently, hand resting on Hope's head. He expected her to panic, to cry, but instead she watched calmly as the car drove away, then leaned into his leg. It was as if she understood that this ending, though bittersweet, was still a good one. A week later, Daniel signed the adoption papers. He named her officially Hope, just as the shelter had. Bringing her home felt strange at first. The house echoed with unfamiliar sounds, tiny paws on hardwood floors, soft breathing at night. Hope followed Daniel everywhere, sitting by the door when he left for work and greeting him each morning like he'd been gone for years. Slowly, the walls Daniel had built began to crack. Months later, on another late-night shift, Daniel received a call about a missing child near the same part of the city. The search was tense, urgent. Without thinking, Daniel brought Hope along, trusting an instinct he couldn't explain. She pulled at the leash, leading him through backstreets and overgrown lots, until they found the child huddled behind a fence, cold but alive. As medics rushed in, Daniel looked down at Hope, who sat calmly, her eyes steady. Once again, she had known exactly where to go. The story made the local news. Hero cop and rescue dog save child, the headlines read. But Daniel knew the truth ran deeper than that. Hope hadn't just saved lives, she had given him his back. She had reminded him why compassion mattered, why paying attention to the smallest signs could change everything. On the anniversary of the night they met, Daniel took Hope back to the alley. The rain had washed away all traces of blood and cardboard, leaving only damp concrete and silence. He knelt, scratching behind her ears, and whispered a thank you. Hope licked his face and wagged her tail, completely content. Sometimes, help doesn't come with sirens or flashing lights. Sometimes, it comes on four trembling legs, with muddy paws pressed together in a silent plea. And sometimes, when you choose to listen, that plea doesn't just save a life, it gives you a new one.